But one of the skills with sales is objection handling. Like every time that you pitch something, you know, your client or your prospective client will suddenly like, oh, what happens if X? And if they ask you that question and you don't have a good answer for it, then you're out of the race. And so your job partly is every single time you talk to somebody, you log the objections. And then when you figure out a really good way of explaining that objection, you kind of almost like can it, almost like, kind of, this is the way I'll answer this objection now. And so some of it is you've got to figure out what that answer is.
How you get the trust in the B2B space when you're starting?
A lot of the thing we're investing in is not just the idea, but the team behind it. Like, have they got a great go-to-market strategy? Do they have that ability to connect? And so the argument to your question really is if you're trying to kind of sell to enterprise salespeople, do you have that network already? And if you don't, what can you do to boost it out? If you are selling to people who are satisfied with the status quo, that's really hard. You need to find early adopters who are not satisfied, who are pissed off, who are angry. That's what you find out through good research. That's what you find out through good sales.
Thank you, Andy, for this discussion. I heard so many things about you from previous podcasts, like your history in online, being a CSS guy and a web guy and all that history. But now I believe that with AI, the history is changing a lot, and mostly for the UI part where when I entered in IT, it was so hard to have the polished UIs and to show to the people, and you need to know how to draw. And and my sketches were very bad. But now you can prompt and get some ideas what you do. And the biggest question that I hear now is how you distill information, because it's so easy to put something in front of the client.
In terms of how you sort of play back information to clients, I don't know, man. I think that's still a kind of a high level skill. I think one of the things I see a lot of designers struggle with, I come from a design background, as you sort of mentioned, is designers often spend a lot of time in their own head. They spend a lot of time thinking through doing, a lot of the way they think is through moving things around on a canvas, etc. AI is amazing. AI is an amazing productivity tool. I'm actually running a conference in the UK in September, all around the intersection of design and AI, because I think it's fundamental. But often what AI does is it kind of skips over the kind of the thinking part. And for things that don't require a lot of thinking, like if all you're doing is like pushing out a little, minor update to your product, actually the thinking is probably irrelevant because there's not much thinking involved. I think when you're doing 0 to 1 work, actually spending a bit more time exploring ideas can be really beneficial. Because as we know, like AI is brilliant, but AI is a really good kind of like mean generating engine. It's taken the sum of all design in the world and kind of boiled it down to some what is like pretty high quality. And I think for a lot of people, if you're a junior designer, if you're a first time founder, like the design that AI can produce is so much higher quality than you can produce yourself. It's wonderful. But if you've been a designer for 10 or 20 years, you've got a real eye for detail, you might be getting 90% there. And so I think a lot of the kind of interaction with designers and AI is using it as a scaffolding to get like all of the basic stuff done really quickly, a little bit like engineers, but then the real kind of intelligence is kind of like pushing it to that last sort of 10%. I know that wasn't your question, but that was a little bit more of a background information, because I think increasingly, well, as has always been the case, a big part of a designer's job, I think, is to do research, to kind of understand user needs, often to understand stakeholder needs. And that back and forth is really, really important. And so a lot of our job is kind of describing to people why we've made certain choices, why this particular pattern is better than that particular pattern, why this layout is better than that layout, maybe because we believe it's going to have a higher, hit the KPIs more, all of that kind of stuff. And so I always think it's been important to kind of bring our clients along with the ride, because again, our job as experts, with like in any area. If you're a security expert, you want to explain to your customers why you're making certain investments. If you're a plumber, you want to explain to your clients why a particular boiler is better than another particular boiler. And as a designer, you want to explain why one user flow is better than another user flow because you think it's going to have a higher kind of hit right KPI. Designers have always been kind of like towards the bottom of the kind of decision stat. You know, CTOs obviously have a huge amount of budget because they tend to have teams that are 10 times bigger than design, and they often sit on the board. So, they've got a lot of power. CPOs have a lot of power. They're often upstream of this kind of stuff. And so designers, if you don't sit at the table, if you don't have that seat at the table, one of the skills you have to be good at is kind of convincing people. And so I think it's really important to be able to kind of explain to people why the thing you're doing is important. Now, this has always been a skill. Junior people tend not to do it particularly well. In the design world, you have kind of like, designer, senior designer, lead designer, then often principal and staff designer. And it's often only at the higher levels that these people, they're already really good at design, but they get better at the kind of political stuff. And I think as you move into those kind of leadership roles, politics and be able to kind of convince people of your ideas and sell is really important, particularly when you don't have the power to kind of dictate. So it's always been important. I think AI makes this a little bit more difficult because like you are no longer the one making the decisions. Often this kind of black box is making a decision. And if you have, prompted a thing and it's come back with a solution, it's really difficult to actually explain why that solution is right because you haven't necessarily, created it. It's even harder if your CEO or your CTO comes out and says, "Hey, look, Andy, I put all this prompting into Claude code and it spit out this interface." And your job, maybe as a design leader, is to manage the quality of the output. It's really difficult to have a conversation with your CTO or your CEO or whomever, CPO, if not only have you not been involved in making those decisions, but they haven't been involved in making decisions because it's been outsourced to a third party kind of black box tool. And so I think it's going to get a little bit more tricky, a little bit more complicated. But that's also why I think having those senior people that can kind of explain this stuff and kind of logically work through a problem in the moment, I think is really important. If we don't know why things are the way they are, like we are the only ones left to have to kind of like figure that out if the black box has already spun out a solution. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It opens so many threads at the same time. Like one of the things that it's it's happening to me. Like I'm a builder. I have a startup. It's an early stage startup. We are in the B2B space. So in the B2B space, you're fixing problems at an organizational level, not at individual level. So the challenge, it's a system challenge.
Yeah.
But at the same time, someone it's struggling, so they will gonna buy. And one of the things that UI AI does, the black box as you call it, it's giving you a dashboard with a lot of information that all that information makes sense. Like, because you don't have the day-to-day struggle that the users will gonna have, everything sounds right. Like it happens in content when you read something that AI generated to you, sounds relatable and you don't know what to strip down. Then in design, I have the same feeling. I generated the first version, the wireframe for a first version dashboard for an account executive that has a lot of information, but at the same time doesn't give all the information. And the question that I always have, and I ping pong with my colleagues, is what to strip down. Because most of the time when the users see what we build, they feel that they are a fifth grade level student who just need the right information, and we present ourselves like professors, university professors.
I mean, I
How
think
you strip down that?
I mean, really high functioning product teams. Like you will usually, let's say you're in a big company, you've got a dozen product teams, and each product team ideally will have at the top of it an engineer, a designer, and a PM. Because each one of those people reflect a different part of the equation. You know, engineers are amazing. And engineers will look at a problem and try and figure out, is it possible? What's the most efficient way to do it? How can we build this thing in a way that kind of has security at its heart, is kind of effective and efficient? So they're often looking at the kind of like the feasibility and how to deliver and to deliver it well within the time they've got available. Now, really, really good engineers also care about users. They also care about business, etc. So I'm not dismissing that, but like the real skill they bring to the table is this kind of like, engineering mindset. Product people, brilliant. Like they are in the numbers, they're in the KPIs, they're talking to the business leaders all the time. They have almost internalized what the business is trying to do. And they're really, really good at kind of translating what the business needs into a language that the team can kind of get behind. So like again, PMs, brilliant PMs are amazing. I also find that a lot of really good PMs really do care about the user experience. A lot of really amazing PMs realize that if you have a really delightful product to use, more people will use it, more people will sign up, more people will stick around. And so most good PMs understand the value of design. But designers are really, really good at empathizing with customers. I think designers are really good at getting rid of all of the information in their minds and seeing the product from first principles. Like, how, if I was a first time user, how would I experience this? If I was really, really stressed and looking for information really quickly on this dashboard, how could I make sure that the most important information is highlighted and the secondary and tertiary information is sort of hidden? It's almost kind of like, I think designing a dashboard is almost like designing an airplane cockpit. There are thousands of knobs and dials and they're all important, but actually the most important things are probably the speed and the altitude and these things. And so you make the most important things big and kind of obvious, and then the next most important things less obvious, and the third most important things even less obvious. And a lot of time, from an engineering and from a product perspective, we make everything the same because everything has, it feels like it's equally urgent. And so I think the best thing is basically having really high functioning teams where engineering, design, and product have an equal sort of say to some extent, and everybody in that team is really respectful of each other's capabilities. And so what happens is you navigate through. And if something is a problem for users, but it's also a really important thing for the business, and it's a really challenging thing for engineering, you kind of work this stuff out. I think one of the challenges that happened of late is designers have been moved out of that triad. And a lot of designers now aren't responsible for inputting into the shape of the product. A lot of designers have been made delivery people. They're taking an existing design system, a product manager gives them a PRD, they basically ship the PRD, they hand it over to engineering, and also engineers are frustrated by this because then engineers just ship the interface. And so in that world where really one person, the product leader, is now shaping the product, I think those other voices get lost. Now, this isn't a kind of like a race for power. It's just kind of this idea of equity. Like, I think having 3 different pairs of eyes from 3 different backgrounds give you more of a fuller, rounded view than a single pair of eyes. And it gets worse because now, if it's not a really, really experienced product leader that's doing it, but it's a junior product leader that's feeding all of their data into an AI system, and then the AI system is basically spitting stuff out, writing the PRDs, or not even doing that, just creating the demo. And maybe you're not even showing it to the designers anymore. Maybe it's just going straight to engineering, or hey, maybe you're just pushing it out live. Like, this is really amazing that product managers can now just push updates. But I think you're missing a useful kind of, second or third sort of pair of eyes. Like in the science world, like not only do you do the work, but you publish it to let everybody see, to check your workings. And I think we're moving into the world when no one's checking their workings anymore, which I think is a risk, but also an opportunity. So like, hey, it's an interesting time to be alive, that's for sure.
Yeah, but I was thinking like when you answered the first question and now you put it back, it's a tough question for sure. Like it's something that it's quite hard because now with AI it's a very big gold rush for delivery, ship fast, break things and so on. So most of the people don't spend so much time in thinking. And how you figure it out what's the minimum amount of thinking? Do you have something like, I don't know, a checklist of or stuff that you're doing when you're thinking about, I don't know, I want to solve this problem with this solution that has these properties? Or what are the things that you're looking like? One of the things that it came to mind, going to the first principle and trying to empathize.
Mhm, mhm.
Probably this is one of the things that I can put on the list.
Well, again, I don't know if this is going to be the answer to your question, but I think um, a lot of the time, when business leaders, product leaders, even designers kind of think about a problem, like we're in such a hurry that what we do is we come up with the first most obvious solution. And that first most obvious solution is often something that we've seen about on another website. We heard too on Lenny's podcast, our main competitor is doing exactly the same thing. And that just feels like the safe option. It feels like the obvious option. And if we have a capacity problem, if we don't have this feature and we need this feature, then I can totally see the desire to ship the first most obvious thing. Because having capability in our customers' hands is better than not having it at all, you could argue. The downside with that is if the if we're all only shipping the first most obvious solution, then very, very quickly every single product becomes the same. And in a world where we have identical products, you can still kind of get market advantage, but the market advantage doesn't come from the product anymore. It doesn't come from the user experience. It doesn't come from users loving your product because every product is the same. Just things are in a different order. Like your navigation is slightly different. Maybe you do step one, step two, step three in one product, and then you do step three, step two, step one in another product. But they largely do the same thing. It's really easy. I talk about this idea in the book of like feature parity. It's really easy to get to feature parity. And it's not a bad strategy. Like it costs a lot. Like it costs Apple computers a lot of R&D and variations and prototypes to design their latest iPhone or their latest MacBook. Now, 10 or 20 years ago, you looked at phones and every single phone company looked different and every single laptop looked different. Now I'll see adverts for Dell computers. And if I didn't know there was a Dell logo on it, I would assume it was a MacBook because it's kind of like beautiful steel case. It's exactly the same. So, what's happened there is they've let Apple do all of the deep thinking and design research and spend tons of money doing this and doing it really well. And they've just copied. Now, for a lot of people that don't really see the difference between a Dell and a Mac computer, that is absolutely fine. And I think if you're a business and you're saying, well, I can have a $2,000 computer, or I can have a $1,000 computer that looks almost the same, that's great. And I'm sure there's loads of businesses out there that have made a living off of being a fast follower, where the product is kind of like 80% there, but not perfect. But the likes of Apple, they really pride themselves in design and differentiation, and they're leading the pack. And so again, there is a question around like, do you want to be a fast follower, or do you want to be a leader in the field? And I think if you believe in the fact that the product is going to be one of your biggest kind of ways of acquiring and retaining customers, I think spending a little bit more time and being a leader kind of for some companies makes a lot of sense. For other companies, the Dells of the world, they're not bad PCs. They, often they're carbon copies. But what they do
But
is
for
they cut. I just to say
but
like
for zero to ones, yeah.
what they do is they don't compete again on product. They compete on price. They compete on distribution. I don't. I suspect they've got whole bunches of sales teams ringing up firms and trying to sell. Like, we'll sell you 1,000 laptops, and we'll give you all of these security things for free, yada yada yada. So they sort of win on distribution, or they win on marketing. Like, their genius is probably doing amazing marketing. And so I think there are different ways of winning, but obviously I come from a product background, and so of course I'm going to want to invest time and effort into building an amazing product.
Okay, I wanted to go back to the 0 to 1 because there's the place where the audience of our podcast is, and for sure for me there's the place where I lurk and I try to figure out like how to get from 0 to 1. And the challenge here, it's figuring out what's in the book you talk about the Kano model.
Mm.
And it resonated with me because you need some features that are like must have, and we are going into the revenue industry,
Yeah.
so where is full of competition. The benchmark for what can be done, it's quite challenged by what Claude is doing.
Yeah.
Claude is the Swiss knife that you're talking in the book, but it's succeeding.
Mm.
Like that's one of the things that I see at the moment. And how you get into the what are the paths to win in 0 to 1 when you have big competition, when you have tools like Claude who are like in every discussion that I have with clients, this is one objection that I have to answer all the time.
Mm.
So Claude is doing the same thing as you are doing and say, yes, but, and I state what we're different.
Yep. I mean, again, there's a bunch of interesting questions lined up there. I mean, again, I think the Claude problem is really similar to what happened 15 years ago. Like 15 years ago, Google was dominant, and Google was doing maps, and it was doing travel, and it was doing video conferencing, it was doing all these things. And so whenever a company started a new business, like a VC would say, well, that's great, but what would happen if Google tried to do that? Like it would just shoot you out of the water. Now we're in the same world, but rather than being Google, it's being Claude. And so that's a perennial problem. Um, and you as an entrepreneur have to figure that answer out. You know, I was actually literally talking about this the other day. We were having a pitch and someone was pitching to us, and my question was like, what happens if Claude come into the market, or Anthropic come into the market, OpenAI come into the market and do the thing you're planning? And that's something you've got to have a good answer for now. You've got to have a good answer when pitching. You've got to have a good answer when you're doing sales. I'll jump around a little bit, but one of the skills with sales is objection handling. Like every time that you pitch something, your client or your prospective client will suddenly like, oh, what happens if X? And if they ask you that question and you don't have a good answer for it, then you're out of the race. And so your job partly is every single time you talk to somebody, you log the objections. And then when you figure out a really good way of explaining that objection, you kind of almost like can it, almost like, kind of, this is the way I answer this objection now. And so some of it is you've got to figure out what that answer is. I'll give you an example, like, um, this is, I'm not particularly knowledgeable in this space, so excuse me if I kind of get a few things wrong, a bit more of an analogy. AWS, cloud infrastructure, they have basic level cloud security, and for 90% of businesses, particularly if you're just spinning something up really quickly, it's absolutely fine. But there is still a massive market for dedicated cloud security, people that help you get SOC 2 and ISO compliance, people that will flag things up that the inbuilt tools are never going to find. And so, yeah, what you're doing is you're basically saying, you're doing two things. You're either pointing at the offering that this other company currently offers and picking out the gaps and saying, hey, look, if you don't really care about security, this is enough. But if you really care about security because you're working with banks or other companies, you need a higher level, and that's going to help you win work. It's going to help you avoid costly outages. It's going to help you, avoid embarrassment or whatever. And so you're showing that your offering has some kind of commercial value above and beyond the level of service you'll be getting from AWS. Also, I imagine if you have a massive problem, your ability to phone somebody up at AWS and get a really good answer is going to be limited. Even if you're offering the same level of security as AWS, maybe your USP isn't the product itself. Maybe it's customer service. Maybe you say, well, hey, look, we offer a similar service, but we give you a guarantee that you will have a name contact, or you will have we will give you a phone number and you will get an answer in 5 minutes. We have 24-hour support. And maybe that's enough. Maybe someone says, well, actually, I want to have the same level of product, but I need an additional hook. That means that I would go with this company rather than you. And so there are lots of ways you can differentiate yourself in the market. And one of the strategies I talk about in the book is kind of like, I think a lot of the time startups kind of are scared of picking fights with the gorilla in the room. I think often it can be a really clever strategy. Like there'll be so many customers who are stuck on AWS who hate the product, that hate the configuration. It's got too big, it's got too bloated. they've had a feature in mind that they're wanting to have for years, and they keep suggesting it, and it never gets delivered. For the 0 to 1 startup companies, these are the perfect people to find: the disenfranchised, the pissed off, the people who are just satisficing, who are making do. And if you ship that one feature that these people have been wanting for ages and haven't been getting, that might be enough to kind of flip them over. If you start pointing out all the weaknesses, if you start kind of knowingly going, oh, don't you hate it when AWS does this, when they put up their pricing, or when this happens, that happens? Don't you feel like you have no power? Don't you feel you have no control? You start picking a fight with the biggest, person in the bar, and you sort of position yourself as like the opposites there. I mean, I think a great example of this is Linear, the product management tool. Like, people love Linear. Like, is it pretty much the same as the Atlassian tools? Yes, it's a ticket management tool. But they have pointed out all of the frustrations, all of the annoyances, all the lack of love and care and attention. And if you're a craft-driven like engineer, which is what like Linear is mostly focused at, you care about the details. You hate working in a product that feels like it was designed 10 years ago. And so, of course, if someone comes along and points at that and says, this is your father or your grandfather's ticket management tool, and they're not changing, they haven't changed in the last 10 years, and we're going to do something about it. This is what Figma did with Adobe. This is what I had another thing in my mind for a second. But yeah, there's lots of products out there. Oh yeah, like Superhuman, the email client. Like,
Yes.
when I mentioned that in the book as well. Like Superhuman, kind of literally, their kind of launch announcement, which I think I have in the book, is something on the lines of like, like, we're building the equivalent of Gmail. If Gmail was built today and not 10 years ago, and if the people who built Gmail really cared about what they were doing, rather than were just kind of like, shipping any old crap. It doesn't quite say that, but that's the kind of vibe you get. And if you're somebody that spends your whole life in email, and you've been using a product that you haven't seen change for 10 years, and you don't feel that they really care about you, of course you want to jump into this new site, shiny, exciting thing. And so a lot of it is about positioning. There's a big chapter in the book all about the importance of positioning, about founder-led sales, founder-led marketing, potentially picking a fight with the biggest person in the room. All of these things are valid techniques. Now, not all of them will work. And as a founder, like, your job is to try different fronts. Like, are there particular features we can launch that the audience of my competitors have underserved? Is there a way of talking about it that kind of stirs people's emotions? Are there new channels that we can use? Maybe your biggest competitor is terrible on social and you become amazing on social. Like, each company that succeeds will find one or two of these leverage points that they will get better at. And the ones that don't, won't. So yeah, that's my answer to your question, I guess.
Okay, I hear you. It's quite for me. It's interesting because picking fights, and one of the things that it's quite challenging. We want to pick fights with the old CRMs, but at the same time we integrate with them. It's like, and it's it's quite hard to pick a fight with, I don't know, Salesforce, and tell how their solution, it's quite hard to be used for a specific niche in the market, probably for big companies, enterprise, 1K plus employees for sure. They are big enough, but for some small companies, for sure, they have the challenges. But at the same time, we integrate with them to give them some superpowers they don't have.
And
And
this is, just sorry jumping in, but this is part of the strategy, isn't it? Like, this is what's happening with Trump's America at the moment. Like, um, if you go against what Trump wants is in his best interests, and you pick a fight with them, you just get slapped with a big tariff. And then the next person doesn't want to pick a fight, and the next person doesn't want to pick a fight, and then America maintains its competitive advantage. And this is what happens. We saw this many years ago with Twitter. I mean, it was great. Like, back in the old days, Twitter had an open API, and it encouraged loads of people to build on their platform. And then when Twitter started seeing people were making money using their API, they cut off API access, built their own version of the tools. And so they basically used their ecosystem to effectively, build out their kind of their product offering. And so, yeah, of course, like Salesforce, like, they know that most people don't want to pick a fight with them because, they're £100 gorilla and they could probably beat you if they wanted. But what happens is you've got to pick a fight in a way that they don't notice. I mean, again, my classic example with this, and it doesn't have to be a fight. Again, the other thing is, it doesn't have to be a fight with a company. It could be a fight with a concept. The great thing about fighting a concept is that there's no company lawyers to kind of like push back against. Of course, if you're doing so well, like again, like if you're such a small company that no one cares about you, they're never going to put their lawyers on you. If people start putting their lawyers on you, yes, it's a pain in the arse, and and it might cost you money, and you don't want to do anything kind of illegal, that's for sure. But it means that they're starting to get worried. And so, particularly in American companies, when people start putting their lawyers on you, it probably means that they're starting to get a bit nervous. But for me, the classic example is Airbnb. Again, I mention it in the book. Like, the hotel industry looked at Airbnb and said, this is never going to be big. Like, who's going to want to stay in a stranger's room? Who's going to want to stay in a stranger's room that hasn't been cleaned? Well, who's going to want to stay in a stranger's room where there's no security, or where there's slightly shonky fire regulations because they don't have the right smoke alarm or the right, there are all of these reasons why hotels dismissed why Airbnb would be amazing. Now, Airbnb, were fighting against like boring hotel rooms. They weren't fighting against Hilton, but they kind of were. They were saying, like, if you go to a new city, why would you want to stay in a generic hotel room that you could be in any city in the world? Why don't you stay with a family in a beautifully designed room in a neighborhood that is for locals rather than tourists, and get a real sense of what it's like? And the hotel industry dismissed them and dismissed them and dismissed them until they became a $1 billion business, and the hotel industry couldn't dismiss them anymore. Or not only could they not dismiss them, they couldn't compete with them. And so, one of the arguments of kind of like picking a fight is like you kind of do it in a way that's under the radar, that everyone dismisses you to the point that they can't dismiss you. And we've seen that, there's, if Salesforce is like a first generation kind of, like platform, and then there's a whole bunch of second generation platforms out there that are a little bit more kind of mobile and, Web 2.0. I think there's room for third generation AI driven platforms out there. And so maybe the fight isn't with Salesforce. Maybe the fight is with like first generation thinking. Maybe it's with this old stodgy kind of like, you're not wrong for hiring IBM, but are you ever right? And so, yeah, you've got to kind of like part of the kind of the positioning is to kind of like put yourself in a new category in people's minds, a category that they're not going to be comparing you with the old category. Because in a straight up fight, again, we're getting a little bit violent here, but like, if you pick a fight with the biggest person in the room, if you go straight up to them face to face, you're probably going to be battered. If you hit them over the head with a chair, then maybe you're in with a chance. And so as a startup, you've got to find what your equivalent of the chair is.
You opened so many threads, and I was like, how you get the trust in the B2B space when you're starting? Because one of the biggest challenges, as you said, if you go directly and say we are better than Salesforce in any company, they will say, go away, I want my bonus, not be fired.
Yeah. I mean, this raises a really interesting question, and a broader question. Like, so we didn't sort of necessarily talk about it at the start of the show, but like you said, I come from like a web design, CSS-y kind of background. I actually run like the UK's first sort of UX agency for about 15 years. After leaving that, I went into the world of startups, into the world of VC. So I work at Camp, which is one of the top kind of VC funds for pre-seed and seed stage kind of
heard about it.
Investments. Yeah. We've had a few good deals over the years. I think actually Camp might have the most unicorns in his portfolio for kind of pre-seed and seed stage investments. So we're really, really credible. And so a lot of the time, a lot of the people that we see on a day-to-day basis are these early stage founders like you, who are trying to make an impact. Now, some of this, sadly, comes down to who we invest in and who we don't invest in. Like at Camp, we get 7,000 pitch decks a year. We maybe talk to 400. We maybe invest in 40. So, as you have to be, we're very selective about who we invest in. Now, a lot of the time, founders think that the way you invest is you invest in the idea. And the idea is only part of the equation, but it's quite a small part. And the reason it's a small part is because we're in the investment space. Like, you probably think that your idea is brand new. because you've come up with it and you haven't seen anyone that does it exactly like you. The weird thing is that we probably saw that same idea a year ago, and we know that we will probably see the same idea in a year's time.
That's the curse.
It is. It is. And so we probably already like the idea. If we've invited you into pitch, we're already bought on the idea. So maybe don't come and try and sell us the idea, because we're like, well, we saw this idea a year ago, but the team wasn't right or the time wasn't right. But now it's a year later, like we still like the idea. Maybe we think that the timing is better. And so your job is to explain to us not only why now is the right time, and maybe now is the right time because, again, a classic example. Somebody pitched us, a year ago, like a design tool to compete with Figma. And a year ago, we were probably thinking, this is hypothetical, but we would probably be thinking, no one's ever going to displace Figma because it's so much part of the designer workflow. Now, with AI and everything changing, there are dozens of tools, pencil and paper and all kinds of things blowing up. So we were probably right not to invest in a year ago, but now might be the perfect time. Or maybe we're a year too late. Maybe we should have done it a year ago and we shouldn't have done it 3 years ago. So the timing thing is really important. But the other thing, to your point, is the founder. What is it about the founder that's going to make go-to-market easy? Like, has that founder operated in a large company before? Because if they've operated in a large company before, they know what it's like to run a big team. Maybe you're somebody that's running a startup for school kids. And hey, if you were a previous teacher, that's great because you understand the market. But do you understand how to scale a team from 5 to 500? Probably not. Do you understand how to fundraise? Probably not. Do you understand how to pitch to head teachers? Well, maybe. But maybe, actually, if you had an ed tech startup before, maybe you actually worked in the top ed tech startup in Europe. So you still understand the education mindset, but you were head of product and you ran a team of 50 people. So I know straight off the gate, you can build and scale a team. And also you've got contacts. So you can probably hire your first engineer, your fifth engineer, your 10th engineer. One of the big problems with a lot of founders that come from a non-technical background is if I say to them, you need a CTO, they'd be like, well, I don't know how to find a CTO. Whereas a really amazing founder will be like, not only do I know how to hire a CTO, I've got this amazing person with an amazing track record. And, and so that, this is one of the reasons why you see a lot of startups in America, like raising, 20 million seed round with no product, because it's not the idea they're investing in, they're investing in the team. The other thing is, again, like you say, network. Like if you can say to people, Karen, I'm terrible with names, from Linear, like he had an amazing following on social media. Like he had, like he could probably get the first 1,000 paying customers through his network alone. That's really attractive. If I'm picking between someone that can literally within 6 months get 1,000 customers just through the network versus somebody that has no network and it will take 5 times as long to get those customers and have to work a lot harder, of course I'm going to go with a person with that network. And so a lot of the thing we're investing in is not just the idea, but the team behind it. Like, have they got a great go-to-market strategy? Do they have that ability to connect? And so the argument to your question really is, if you're trying to kind of sell to enterprise salespeople, do you have that network already? And if you don't, what can you do to boost it out? Can you find an amazing angel that is tapped into that network? Like, can you find an ex-MD of a really big company that has, lunches with all the people that you want to sell to and will make you an introduction? Like, what are the things you can do to get that unfair advantage? In the startup world, we talk about what your unfair advantage is. And the problem is most people don't have an unfair advantage. And if you don't have an unfair advantage, it doesn't mean you can't succeed, but it just means that the odds are stacked against you. And so anything you can do to kind of find and leverage that unfair advantage is really important. Again, in the book, I talk about how you find your first 10, your first 100, your first 1,000 users. And a lot of that is through your network.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. And you're saying unfair advantage is mostly the trust that you can bring to the company or to the product or to the idea that you have. Yeah. Because that's one of the things that I wanted to challenge the canvas, because that's one of the tools that I use a lot. But most of the time I feel that it's used poorly. Firstly, people start from left to right, like we are writing, and you have to start it as Arabic from right to left. And at the same time, you need to start from unfair advantage and define what's your unfair advantage to do that, to talk with those people and so on. So I get what you're saying, but at the same time, how you leverage the trust in an organization, and probably I didn't get the gist of your answer, how you leverage the trust in an organization where people are mostly scared to bruise their social status, because when you're in a enterprise situation, you have social hierarchy, you have people who have their own roles, and I don't want to put a new product into my line because probably if it will fail, it will be my reputation bruised and so on.
Yep.
So how you work that in a more specific way, and if you can have some, I don't know, examples from previous companies you work with, that would be wonderful.
I mean, I think the real problem is you've got to find early adopters. And most people that try enterprise sales, like I think enterprise sales is amazing and can be really good. But if you're pitching to people who are not early adopters, who are conservative, you spend a whole bunch of time selling into a company that's probably never going to buy you anyway. So you've got to somehow figure out like what the signals are that this person is an early adopter. There are a couple of things. So first of all, like if you are a brand new company, you don't have a tech stack already, then there's no tech stack that you need to kind of dismantle. Or if you're a company that's moving from like small to medium or medium to large, where you've outgrown your existing tech stack and you need a new tech stack. And so there are certain indicators of like, oh, I can talk to this person now because they're changing. Another example is obviously someone's just joined a company. Like if you just joined a company, a new company, you've got 6 months to make a big deal. So if you join and you're the new young exciting kind of product leader, and your boss keeps breathing down your neck around kind of like bringing AI, and you discover this amazing AI powered tool, and the salesperson has shown you that it can save you, millions of pounds over the first year, there's a real chance that like because you're new, you don't have anything to risk. And you might go, well, look, I'm going to petition for us to kind of do a POC, a proof of concept. And we'll get the proof of concept in, and the proof of concept demonstrates in the first 6 months, it saved 500,000. And you're like, well, this is great. We've saved 500,000. We've now proved it works. Let's roll it out to this next branch or this next company. And so it's all the typical kind of like, enterprise sales stuff. You will talk to a lot of people who will give you an indication that that's what they want to do, but they don't. This whole idea, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince. And you've got to be really good at sales. Ultimately, you've got to be really good at sales. The thing I find is that, like nobody looks forward to having the kind of the Salesforce kind of like local account rep phone you up and have a conversation. But people love talking to founders. Like if you go to someone and you say, hey, look, I've just started this new startup. We've been backed by these amazing VCs. We've got a couple of good logos. Your competitor A and competitor B is using the product. Do you want to have a chat? People will at least have a chat with you. And then it becomes your sales skills. Like, are you talking to the right person? Are you asking the right questions? If they're not the right person, if they're the decision maker, can you quickly elevate from them to talking to the decision maker? Can you create a really low risk way that you can show them the product? You're not trying to get them to stop using Salesforce at the moment. You're trying to show a proof of concept that if we use the product, we can save you a ton of money. And if you can show that you can save them a ton of money and they do the proof of concept and it works, then you've got to kind of jump through procurement and kind of security and all that kind of stuff. But you're one step further. And so it's a traditional kind of enterprise sales route. And people do it, like unfortunately, there's no silver bullet. I think a lot of times when people talk to a VC or an advisor, like, what is the magic thing? Is there just like a particular hand movement or a particular series of words I can say, and suddenly everything is solved? And I wish I could say there was. I wish I could say there was a magic handshake, but there isn't. What there is just...
You're from UK. You should know. Like, it's Harry Potter there.
Well, I do, but I'm not going to tell you, am I? Because that's my competitive advantage. But for everybody else that doesn't have that secret Harry Potter kind of like, kind of magic symbol, it's just getting really good at stuff. It's getting really good at sales. That's why my book has 3 or 4 chapters in sales. That's why I recommend a bunch of, if you do a search for I've got a list of my top 10 favorite books in startups, and a couple of them are kind of like sales, kind of SaaS sales books, because it's just hard graft. And but like I say, like going back to what we said before, um, if you are selling to people who are satisfied with the status quo, that's really hard. You need to find early adopters who are not satisfied, who are pissed off, who are angry. That's what you find out through good research. That's what you find out through good sales. And you say to them, well, look, this company doesn't care about you, but we do. We're incredibly quick. We're using all the latest AI to push out updates. Look at our backlog. Like every week, we're pushing a new update. When was the last time this big company pushed an update? Was it 6 months ago? Was it a year ago? And you're just demonstrating to people that you're hungry and you're pushing things. And if you are a risk taker, and maybe only 1 in 100 people in enterprise are risk takers, early adopters, they'll go for it. But what I'm sensing is weirdly, like, the kind of like early adopter, early majority, late majority. A lot of
Yes.
people are trying to sell to the
Crossing
late
the chasm.
majority. Exactly. A lot of people are trying to sell to the late majority because they're the big, exciting ICPs that they want. I talk in the book about this idea of having a beachhead. Like, don't if you're trying to, like, if it's the Second World War and you're trying to invade Europe, you've got to start by landing at a beach and then marshal your forces and grow. You don't just like jump straight into the middle of Germany, for instance. Like, you've got to have a plan. And so you've got to find your beachhead. And it might look small. Like I think one of the problems is a lot of people mistake the pitch deck they sell to VCs as the strategy they sell to grow. At VCs, you want to say, I'm going to be aiming at all these big, massive companies. And that's great. But that will be 3 years' time. Like, your ICP on day one isn't, the probably the 10 million pound contract that Pepsi has with Salesforce. It's that person that runs a business that is really frustrated that you can lean in, and you get that one person, and then they introduce you to 2 more of their friends, and they introduce you to 2 more of your friends. And slowly over a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, you build to that ideal customer profile. So I think ideal customer profiles are a good idea theoretically, but they often push you into a market that is too mature for what you're offering.
Okay. Yeah, I get what you're saying. And for sure, probably it's an excuse that I have in my head. But when you're thinking about a beachhead strategy, for sure, you have the beach and you know where you're landing. But when you're going on the internet, it's like the market. Like, I like the analogy of a marketplace where you go and you buy groceries and it has a physical space, and you have tomatoes and you have cucumbers, and like you have competition on cucumbers and all that kind of stuff. Like that is visual. But when you're going online, you're fighting with the whole internet.
But also, here's the thing, like, I think marketplaces are really tricky, because if, like, I was on a holiday recently and we went to this local market, and you go into the local market and you go to the biggest store with the freshest looking produce and the nicest sales team. And that's what Salesforce are. Salesforce, like, you are never going to be surprised by what they offer, but you're probably never going to be massively disappointed. What you actually need to do is you need to be in the car park. So when the person comes to the market, before they even get into the market and see the competition, you're there in the car park with a lovely, tasty coconut, or kind of like, pineapple on a stick. You want to have a different thing. You want to have the pineapple already cooked and ready to eat, or peeled and ready to eat, rather than just selling pineapples. And you want to be somewhere before you get into the market, because in the market, you are now overwhelmed by choice. Whereas if you can position yourself outside the market, like, that's the best place to be. Or, like, not even anywhere near the market. Like, you want to be like, that, like, if people go to the market on Friday, by next Wednesday, they're going to be running out of produce. So don't compete in the market. Go and sit in a residential area and offer people who are, this is why you've got, like, in the UK, like, we have all these big supermarkets, but all the supermarkets have just started creating corner shops, because they know that actually, like, you might only do the big shop once a week, But if you're like running out of groceries on a Thursday, you're not going to do the big shop, but you might go to the local corner shop. And if you're choosing between Tesco and, Mr. Smith Grocers, you might be drawn in with Tesco because it's there, it's immediate, it feels safe. And so, like, look, there's no easy answers. This stuff is really, really difficult. But like I say, like you've got to find the place that is too small for your competitors to even care about, but that hits a need that's immediate, that your customers are not being served by somebody else. And so, and that could be in terms of product features, it could have been in terms of like go-to-market strategy, positioning, whatever. And it's only going to be a small subset. I mean, again, this is the other thing. This is a really sad thing. I mean, if you look at kind of like Cory Doctorow writes this really good book about enshittification. He's a really amazing author, and he's talked about like this trend that what happens is a startup starts serving a really, really tight network really, really well. But then as it grows, it forgets that early adopter and it goes for a bigger and bigger and bigger network. And we've all experienced, we've all been early adopters to products where we thought we were the most important person in the world. Like Twitter, I was an early user of Twitter, and I thought that like Twitter was built for me, but it wasn't built for me. It was built for the Kardashians, and it was built for the Guardian, and it was built for like all of these big brands. But it took me a while to realize that they didn't care about me anymore. They used me as their kind of beachhead, but they moved on. I can't remember which one of the big like CRMs. I can't remember which one, but I remember using this CRM like 10 years ago, and all of their
Pipe
marketing,
drive.
yeah, but it could have been. It could have been. And all their marketing was like, we're there for the little guy, we're there for the small business.
Yes, pipe drive.
Yeah. And then over the years, it's become clear that like the pricing's gone up. They don't want me as a customer anymore. They want the big sales teams. But that's the perfect point where you go in and you say, hey, look, remember when Pipe Drive was really cool? We're going to do that. And so you then steal their customers, and then you service them really well. And then unfortunately you get 5 rounds of funding and you now get like $500 million. And in 5 years time, you start doing the same thing. This is the idea of shitification, like the idea that like everything starts beautiful and small and crafty, but scale often kind of means that you desert your new users. But then someone else comes along and picks them up. So look, there's loads of stuff there, hopefully.
Yeah. I was curious of something. How, probably if you have to rewrite your book now with all the AI hype, and for sure what happened in December, like everyone is talking about the moment when Opus 4.5 entered in the room and blasted everything that we knew. What are the things that would be changed in your book based on what's happening now?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. My argument or answer is probably going to be unsatisfying because I don't think an awful lot. I tried to write a book that was not rooted in any technology or not rooted in any kind of sort of philosophy that could be overturned. It's basically about kind of like for the audience, the book is basically about the first 2 years of running a business and how you get from like zero to $1 million ARR. I think the one thing I would change is that probably needs to be 2 million now, because I think the funding like landscape has changed. I think very much like when I was writing the book 2 or 3 years ago, like to get a good Series A, you needed like, $1 million ARR. I'm now seeing founders with $1 million ARR being turned down for Series A because they don't have a good enough traction. So it's more like 2 or 3. But that would be a really easy, like, find and replace update for version 2 of the book. I just changed 1 million to 2 million jobs and people.
Selling it again.
But I think a lot of the core content of the book is still relevant. The downside is it's just a lot harder. I think the real problem they're in at the moment is that AI has increased the pace of delivery. And so you can ship a really, really high quality feature parity product in a fraction of the time it used to take. It maybe used to have to raise seed, pre-seed and seed, and be spending 18 months before you had a half decent product. Now, arguably, you can have that half decent product, maybe in 6 months. Maybe you've built that in your bedroom before you even had any investment, because you don't need a team of 10 developers now. You can kind of like, one shot it and vibe code it and do it yourself. And so what's happened is the pace of execution has sped up. Now, people that were put off doing startups are doing more. So I think there's more people in the market looking for more money. I don't think the amount of money has increased. And so your chances of raising funding has gone down, arguably, because there's more people in the market. Because there's more people in the market, VCs are looking for more traction. So, it still happens that people will get a pre-seed with no product and just a deck, but that's increasingly rare. Much more likely is you'll have a deck, you'll have a working product, you'll have users, you might even have revenue. And so the bar has shifted. And so I think the main thing is that, like, I guess the book was written in a world where you'd be doing all the things in the book after you've raised funding. And I think now you probably need to start doing all the growth things much, much earlier. You need to have your product and you need to be going out and doing all that growth stuff before you maybe even raise your first round. So I don't think the book's changed, but I think the kind of the Overton window, or the kind of the barrier of what's accessible or what's possible has shifted. I think the other thing, when in a really weird place, is I think channels have collapsed. They had collapsed when we wrote the book. Marketing channels. So I'll give you an example. Okay, I can see you're like, what does he mean there? Before the pandemic, 2019, if you were a founder that had 50,000, 100,000 followers on Twitter, you could write a single tweet launching a new product, and people would come barreling in, and literally you'd have like 10,000 people on the wait list. You'd have, like, on launch, you'd have like 1,000 people sign up, like things would explode. Like, all of these channels are really, really popular. What's happened recently is all of these channels, their numbers have drifted, engagement has drifted. So it used to be the case that I would be on Twitter like, 20 times a day. Now a lot of people are on there like maybe once or twice a week. And so if I post an announcement, there's a really good chance that my audience wouldn't even see it. But also, all of the algorithms have been repositioned to be selling advertising. So even if I've got my 50 or 100,000 followers, I think I've got like 70,000 followers on Twitter, my engagement has massively dropped. Like, I literally could have, like 5 years ago, I'd stick a tweet out and it was a rubbish tweet and I'd get 200, 300 likes. Now I'm lucky to get 10 or 20 likes. Maybe part of that is because my community has gone to other platforms, or they're not on those platforms anymore. That's part of platform collapse. Part of it is the algorithms are now not promoting me. If I put a link in my tweet about my new thing, the algorithm is going to say, well, look, that's going to take people off the platform. We don't want to take people off the platform. So they downgrade it and they upgrade adverts. And so all of these channels are collapsed. It's much, much harder. Like honestly, go to market, like selling is the hardest thing at the moment. Like, this is why, like, actually, when I'm investing in founders, like I said, I'm not necessarily investing in the product. The thing I'm looking for is, like, can this company sell? Does this founder have a background of selling? Like, it's horrible because I really want to be like investing in amazing technical founders or amazing design founders. But if they have no clue and no experience in selling in this environment, that's really hard. Whereas if the founder could say, hey, look, I literally had a founder the other day saying, hey, look, I was the first salesperson in this company. I sold our first 50 million in sales. I landed a 20 million revenue contract with insert big brand name. I then went on from sales to product leadership, and I was a product leader for 5 years. And now I'm building a startup. I'm immediately thinking, well, hell, this person has product knowledge, big company knowledge, and can sell. And the reality is, sadly, the best products don't usually aren't the most successful. It's the ones that you can figure out go to market. And so with this channel collapse, I think it's really harder. And I think AI is hastening that, because it used to be the case that you would find a clever little, you'd find a really clever little outbound technique. Maybe when LinkedIn started doing audio notes, you were the first person to send an audio note to somebody, and they would open it up because they'd be like, what the hell is this? And then everyone started doing audio notes, and the whole, within 6 months, that whole, thing gets rinsed, and then something else comes along that people will find. And I think AI has kind of collapsed that. Like, now, like, I can I can get Apollo, I can get Lemlist, or I can, mostly like code my own go-to-market engine. Like most of my founders, sadly, most of my founders are not buying off-the-shelf CRMs anymore. Most of my founders are kind of like, building their own integrated kind of like go-to-market tech stack that automatically writes blog posts for SEO and automatically sends out drip fed messages. And they're really good at scraping data and getting data feeds and sending emails out that seem really human. But we're now being inundated with spam. And so, literally in the last 6 months, I was always pretty good at keeping on top of my email, and I was always pretty good at telling whether something was spam or not. Now I can't tell whether something's spam. And so literally, like if an email comes in, if it's not somebody I know in the first 2 minutes or 2 lines, or if it's not a founder saying I'm raising funding, I immediately go like junk, because there's so much pollution of the channel. And so AI is really, really good if you figured out the go-to-market, but it's also meaning there's a lot of like low-level kind of like bad marketing out there that's polluting the channels. And so yeah, this is the main thing that's happened is channels have collapsed, channels have become polluted. It's really hard for founders. Like there are more founders out there with more businesses, and all of them are struggling to get sales because of channel collapse.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, and it's at the same time, it's quite hard to differentiate, to say like this, without being outrageous, because you can be outrageous and pick a fight, and yeah, for sure you can get some clickbaits, but at the same time, if it's not part of your values and you want to build a
I say, I think there's a difference though. Like, just to be really clear, like, I don't like people who clickbait, who are outrageous for the sake of being outrageous. But I think if you are a quality software craftsperson and you care about amazing SaaS products, you care about engineering, you care about design, and you start seeing that the main competitor out there is taking their customers for granted, you are sharing a view of the world that your customers also believe in. You want to produce really great products. And so I'm not saying like, just go and, like do some kind of silly gimmicks for clicks. Like I think you have to, and this is like Linear really believe in building amazing, beautiful software, that their users love. And because of that, they could also point to all of the areas where people are building crappy, shitty, overpriced software and ignoring their users. And that is not a bad thing to point out. Like you're not doing it for clicks. You're doing it because you have a moral focus on doing good work, and you are outraged when people do bad work. And the people you want to have work with you and use you also care the same. And so it's about sharing your values in a way that connects with people. But an easy way of sharing your values is saying, hey, look, this is software I'm building. I'm not building software like this over here. And isn't it frustrating when we build software like this? And so, yeah, picking a fight can be a noble thing, not just, if you're, and again, just be clear, I'm not suggesting you're a bully. I'm not suggesting you just run around and pick fights for no reason, but it should be something you care about.
Yes, I get what you're saying. Good. Thank you very much, Andy. It was a lovely discussion that we went through so many topics, and for sure I really appreciate your vibe and your openness and the way that you point out stuff that are like misleading from what market is teaching us. And looking forward to see you in Bucharest in I believe 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's very close now, isn't it? So hopefully this will get out really soon.
Yes.
But yeah, I look forward to hanging out in Bucharest, and yeah, should be really good fun.
Yes, thank you very much. Have a great day. Take care, Andy. In the end, don't forget that the Delta Bootcamp is coming. 8-12 June. This is a bootcamp made for exceptional founders who are building extraordinary startups and want to take over the world. From Romania to the world. Join now.